Baby screams every time they pass one road, and they discover what happened there. Asterisk. When 8-month-old Lucas Martinez first began screaming hysterically every time his family drove down Elm Street in their quiet suburban neighborhood, his parents assumed it was just another phase of infant development. But when the screaming became so violent that Lucas would vomit and hyperventilate, his tiny body convulsing with terror that seemed impossible for a baby who couldn't even walk. Yet Maria and Carlos Martinez knew they were witnessing something far more disturbing than colic. The screaming wasn't random, it happened at the exact same spot every time. A nondescript stretch of road lined with modest houses and mature oak trees. Lucas would be calm and happy until they reached the 1200 block of Elm Street, where he would explode into shrieks of absolute terror, as if he were reliving the worst moment of his life. When they discovered that avoiding that specific street was the only way to keep their son calm, the family began to wonder, what could an 8-month-old baby possibly know about a road he'd never walked, in a town where nothing remarkable had ever happened? The answer would lead them into the darkest chapter of their community's hidden history. Asterisk. If stories that make you question what babies can truly remember send chills down your spine, make sure to subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. What you're about to discover will change how you think about memory, trauma, and the mysterious ways the past can echo through the innocent. Part 1. The INCID morning of October 15th, 2023 began like any other for the Martinez family in Millbrook, Connecticut. Maria was taking 8-month-old Lucas to his pediatric appointment while Carlos headed to work at the local hardware store. The drive to Dr. Patterson's office was a routine they'd followed monthly since Lucas's birth. A simple 15-minute journey through their quiet suburban neighborhood. Lucas sat contentedly in his car seat, babbling softly and playing with his favorite teething ring as Maria navigated the familiar streets. The baby had always been good in the car, often falling asleep during longer trips, and this morning seemed no different as they approached the intersection of Maple and Elm Streets. But as Maria turned onto Elm Street, everything changed. Without warning, Lucas began screaming, not the typical cry of a fussy baby, but a sound of absolute terror that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. The screaming was so sudden and intense that Maria nearly swerved off the road, her heart racing as she tried to understand what had triggered such extreme distress. "Lucas, baby, what's wrong?" she called over the deafening wails, checking her rear-view mirror to see her son's face contorted with an expression of pure panic. The screaming continued, growing more desperate with each passing second. Lucas's small body was rigid with fear, his hands clenched into fists, his face red from the strain of his cries. Maria had never seen her normally calm baby react with such intensity to anything. She pulled over immediately, turning around to comfort her son, but nothing she did seemed to help. Lucas continued screaming, his cries echoing off the car windows with such force that Maria feared he might hurt himself. When she reached back to touch him, his tiny body was drenched in sweat despite the cool October morning. After several minutes of frantic attempts to soothe him, Maria made a decision that would later prove significant. She started the car and drove away from Elm Street, heading toward the main road that would take them to the doctor's office via an alternate route. The moment they turned off Elm Street, Lucas's screaming stopped as abruptly as it had begun. The silence in the car was so sudden and complete that Maria wondered if something was wrong. She glanced in the mirror to see Lucas looking around with normal infant curiosity, as if the previous minutes of terror had never happened. "What in the world?" Maria whispered, her hands still shaking on the steering wheel. By the time they reached Dr. Patterson's office, Lucas was his usual happy self, smiling at the receptionist and babbling contentedly during his examination. When Maria described the incident to the pediatrician, Dr. Patterson suggested it might have been a reaction to sunlight. a loud noise, or even gas pains that had coincidentally occurred while driving down that particular street. Babies can be very sensitive to environmental changes, Dr. Patterson explained. It's probably nothing to worry about, but keep an eye on it. If it happens again, we might want to look into possible triggers. That afternoon, Carlos suggested they test whether the incident was truly connected to Elm Street. Maybe it was just a coincidence, he said. Let's drive down there again and see what happens. Maria was reluctant, but her curiosity overcame her protective instincts. They loaded Lucas into the car and drove toward Elm Street, both parents, watching their son carefully for any signs of distress. As they turned onto Elm Street, Lucas began to whimper. By the time they reached the 1200 block, the same area where the morning's incident had occurred, he was screaming again with the same terrifying intensity. His cries were so desperate that Maria felt physical pain listening to them. "Turn around," she said urgently. "Turn around right now." The moment Carlos reversed direction and drove away from the area, Lucas's screaming stopped. They sat in stunned silence, both parents realizing they had witnessed something that defied logical explanation. That evening, they decided to avoid Elm Street entirely, taking alternate routes to all their usual destinations. It was an inconvenience, but the memory of their son's terror was too fresh to risk another episode. The incident had introduced a mystery into their lives that would consume their thoughts and challenge their understanding of what an 8-month-old baby could possibly know about a street he'd never walked down alone. Part 2. ESGALADIO over the following weeks. The Martinez family's life became increasingly complicated by Lucas's inexplicable terror of Elm Street. What had initially seemed like an isolated incident evolved into a pattern that forced them to restructure their entire daily routine around avoiding one specific stretch of road. The avoidance strategy worked for about 2 weeks, but Millbrook was a small town with limited routes between residential areas and the main commercial district. Eventually, Carlos forgot about the restriction and took their usual route to the grocery store, turning onto Elm Street without thinking about the consequences. Lucas's reaction was even more violent than before. The screaming began the moment they entered the 1200 block, but this time it was accompanied by physical symptoms that terrified Maria. The baby began hyperventilating, his small chest rising and falling so rapidly that she feared he might lose consciousness. His face turned purple, and he vomited so forcefully that it soaked through his clothes and car seat. "Pull over," Maria shouted, but Carlos was already steering toward the curb, his hands shaking as he tried to park safely while their son's screams filled the car. Maria unbuckled Lucas from his car seat and held him against her chest, feeling his tiny heart racing like a hummingbird's. The baby's body was rigid with terror, his muscles tense as if he were trying to protect himself from some invisible threat. "It's okay, baby," Maria whispered, though her own voice was trembling. "Mama's here. You're safe." The screaming continued for nearly 10 minutes after they'd driven away from Elm Street, longer than it had ever lasted before. When Lucas finally calmed down, he was exhausted and listless, staring at his parents with eyes that seemed to hold knowledge far beyond his months. Carlos immediately called Dr. Patterson, who suggested they bring Lucas in for an emergency evaluation. The pediatrician conducted a thorough examination, testing for neurological issues, ear infections, and any other medical condition that might cause such extreme reactions to specific stimuli. "I've never seen anything quite like this," Dr. Patterson admitted after completing his tests. "Lucas appears to be perfectly healthy, but his reaction to that particular location is clearly traumatic. I'm going to refer you to a pediatric psychologist who specializes in early childhood trauma." The referral led them to Dr. Rebecca Stone, a child psychologist who had studied unusual cases of infant distress. Dr. Stone was initially skeptical that An 8-month-old could have location-specific trauma, but she agreed to observe Lucas's reactions under controlled conditions. The controlled test took place on November 10, 2023. Dr. Stone accompanied the Martinez family as they drove through various parts of Millbrook, documenting Lucas's responses to different environments. The baby remained calm and happy throughout most of the journey, even when they encountered loud noises, bright lights, and other potential triggers. But when they approached Elm Street, Lucas's behavior changed dramatically. Even before they reached the 1200 block, he began showing signs of distress whimpering, increased fidgeting, and what appeared to be hypervigilance. When they entered the area where his screaming typically occurred, his reaction was immediate and overwhelming. "Stop the car," Dr. Stone said urgently, her professional composure shaken by the intensity of Lucas's terror. "This child is experiencing genuine trauma. Whatever is causing this reaction is very real for him." The escalation reached a new level when Maria noticed that Lucas's reactions were becoming more specific. He would begin showing distress at the exact same point in the road each time, as if he were anticipating something terrible that was about to happen at a precise location. "It's like he knows," Maria told Carlos that evening. "It's like he remembers something horrible happening right there." The family's friends and extended relatives began to notice the changes in their routine. When asked why they never drove down Elm Street anymore, Maria and Carlos found themselves offering vague explanations about traffic or construction, unwilling to share the truth about their son's inexplicable terror. By December 2023, the situation had become so consuming that Maria began keeping a detailed journal of Lucas's reactions. She documented the exact time and location of each incident, the duration of his distress, and any environmental factors that might be relevant. The journal revealed a pattern that was both consistent and deeply disturbing. Lucas's reactions were becoming more intense over time, as if repeated exposure to the area was strengthening rather than diminishing his fear. The family realized they needed to understand what was causing their son's terror before it escalated further. Part 3. The INV-STIGATATATIING. To understand the source of Lucas's terror, Maria and Carlos began investigating the history of Elm Street, focusing specifically on the 1200 block, where their son's reactions were most intense. They started by researching property records, hoping to find clues about what might have happened in that area to cause such a traumatic response. Carlos visited the Millbrook Town Hall, where he spent hours poring over property deeds, tax records, and municipal documents dating back to the 1940s. The 1200 block of Elm Street consisted of modest ranch houses built in the 1950s, with well-maintained lawns and mature trees that gave the neighborhood a peaceful suburban character. "Nothing unusual here," Carlos reported to Maria. "Just normal families, normal houses." The area's been residential for decades, but Maria's investigation took a different approach. She began talking to longtime residents of the neighborhood, hoping to uncover memories or stories that might not appear in official records. Her first conversations were with elderly neighbors who had lived in the area for 30 or 40 years. Most of the residents had similar stories to tell. Elm Street had always been a quiet, family-friendly neighborhood where children played safely and neighbors knew each other. Several people mentioned that the area had been particularly popular with young families because of its proximity to the elementary school and its reputation for safety. The breakthrough in their investigation came when Maria spoke with Eleanor Whitman, an 87-year-old woman who had lived on Elm Street since 1962. Eleanor was initially reluctant to discuss the neighborhood's history, but when Maria explained about Lucas's reactions, the elderly woman's demeanor changed. "What part of Elm Street?" Eleanor asked, her voice becoming quieter. "The 1200 block," Maria replied, "right in front of the Morrison house." Eleanor was silent for a long moment, her eyes filling with tears. "I haven't talked about this in years," she said. "Finally. Most people who remember are gone now, and the families involved moved away long ago." Over the next hour, Eleanor shared a story that had been carefully buried by the Millbrook community for over 60 years. In August 1962, a 3-year-old boy named Timothy Walsh had been struck and killed by a drunk driver while playing in the street in front of what was now the Morrison House. The accident had happened in the early evening when Timothy had been chasing a ball that had rolled into the road. "The driver didn't even stop," Eleanor said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Little Timothy was playing with his cousin, and the ball went into the street. He ran after it, and that car came around the corner going way too fast. The sound of the impact—" She paused, unable to continue. Maria felt a chill run down her spine. "What happened to the driver?" "He was never caught," Eleanor replied. "The police investigated, but this was 1962, no cameras, no witnesses who got a good look at the license plate. The Walsh family was devastated. They moved away about a year later. Couldn't bear to live on the same street where their son had died." Eleanor went on to explain that the accident had traumatized the entire neighborhood. Parents became overprotective, children were forbidden from playing in the street, and the community had gradually developed an unspoken agreement not to discuss the tragedy. "We thought it was better to let sleeping dogs lie," Eleanor said. "But maybe we were wrong. Maybe some things shouldn't be forgotten." Maria researched the story at the Millbrook Public Library, where she found newspaper archives from August 1962. The headline in the Millbrook Gazette read, "Local boy killed in hit and run. Accident." The article provided additional details about Timothy Walsh. He had been described as a happy, energetic child who loved playing outside and had just learned to ride his tricycle. The investigation revealed that the accident had occurred at approximately the same time of day that Lucas experienced his most intense reactions during their evening drives. The exact location mentioned in the police report corresponded to the spot where Lucas's screaming typically began. Carlos found additional records in the town's emergency services archives, including the ambulance report from August 15, 1962. The document described the scene of the accident in clinical terms, but Maria found the details heartbreaking. Timothy Walsh had been pronounced dead at the scene, his injuries too severe for medical intervention. The investigation had revealed a tragic event that had been deliberately forgotten by the community. But the question remained, how could an 8-month-old baby in 2023 be reacting to a trauma that had occurred 60 years before his birth? Part 4. The BRE genealogy, the most stunning discovery in the Martinez family's investigation came when Maria decided to research the genealogy of the Walsh family, hoping to find any possible connection that might explain Lucas's reactions to the site of Timothy's death. Using online databases and genealogical records, she began tracing the family's lineage and their connections to the Millbrook community. The breakthrough came when Maria discovered that Timothy Walsh's mother, Catherine Walsh, had been born Catherine Martinez, sharing the same surname as Lucas's family. Further research revealed that Catherine had been the daughter of Eduardo Martinez, who had immigrated to Connecticut from Mexico in the 1930s and had worked in the local manufacturing plant. "Carlos," Maria said, her voice trembling as she called her husband to share the discovery. "I think Timothy Walsh might have been related to us." Carlos rushed home from work to review Maria's genealogical research. The family tree she had constructed showed that Eduardo Martinez had been Carlos's great-grandfather, making Catherine Walsh Carlos's great-aunt. This meant that Timothy Walsh, the 3-year-old who had died on Elm Street in 1962, had been Carlos's cousin. "This is impossible," Carlos said, staring at the family tree. "My family never talked about anyone named Timothy." I've never heard of Catherine Walsh. Maria's continued research revealed why the family connection had been lost. After Timothy's death, Catherine and her husband had moved to California, where they had lived in relative isolation from the Martinez family. The trauma of losing their son had caused them to sever most of their connections to the Millbrook community, including relationships with extended family members. The investigation took another dramatic turn when Maria contacted the Millbrook Cemetery to inquire about Timothy Walsh's burial. The cemetery records showed that Timothy had been buried in the children's section of Millbrook Memorial Park, but his grave had been unmarked for decades because the original headstone had been damaged by weather and never replaced. Dr. Stone, the pediatric psychologist who had been working with the family, was intrigued by the genealogical connection. "This adds a new dimension to Lucas's case," she said. "If there's a family connection, it might explain why he's having such a specific reaction to that location." The breakthrough reached its climax when Maria arranged to visit Timothy Walsh's grave with 8-month-old Lucas. She wanted to see if her son would have any reaction to the burial site, hoping to understand whether his terror was connected to the location of the accident or to something deeper. The visit to the cemetery took place on January 8, 2024. Maria carried Lucas through the memorial park, eventually finding the unmarked grave in the children's section. The plot was overgrown with weeds, with only a small metal marker indicating the burial site. Lucas's reaction was immediate and profound. The moment Maria approached Timothy's grave, the baby began to whimper and reach toward the ground with his small hands. He didn't scream as he did on Elm Street, but his behavior was markedly different from his usual demeanor. "It's like he recognizes it," Maria whispered to Carlos, who was documenting the visit with his phone camera. When Maria knelt beside the grave and held Lucas close to the burial site, the baby became very still and quiet. His usual babbling stopped, and he stared at the ground with an expression that seemed far too serious for an 8-month-old. The most remarkable moment came when Lucas reached down and touched the earth above Timothy's grave. As his small hand made contact with the soil, he made a soft sound, not crying, but a gentle vocalization that sounded almost like recognition or comfort. "He's saying goodbye," Maria said, tears streaming down her face. "I think he's saying goodbye to Timothy." The cemetery visit had provided compelling evidence that Lucas's terror of Elm Street was connected to the family tragedy that had occurred 60 years before his birth. The baby's reactions suggested not just awareness of the location where his relative had died, but some form of connection to the traumatic event itself. Dr. Stone's analysis of the cemetery visit, combined with the genealogical evidence, created a case that challenged conventional understanding of infant memory and family trauma. The breakthrough suggested that Lucas was not just reacting to a location, but responding to unresolved grief and trauma that had been passed down through generations. Of the Martinez family. Part 5. The Sionne Iowan story of Lucas Martinez and his connection to Timothy Walsh's death gained attention when Dr. Stone presented the case at the Northeast Pediatric Psychology Conference in February 2024. The presentation, titled Intergenerational Trauma and Location-Specific Responses in Infancy, sparked immediate debate among professionals who struggled to explain the phenomenon through conventional psychological models. Dr. Michael Stevens, a prominent child development specialist from Yale University, publicly challenged the case in a series of academic papers and media interviews. "We're being asked to accept that an 8-month-old baby can somehow sense a family tragedy that occurred 60 years ago at a specific location," he argued. "The more reasonable explanation is that the infant is responding to subtle environmental cues or unconscious parental anxiety." The controversy intensified when Dr. Stevens assembled a team of specialists to conduct what he called a rigorous scientific evaluation of Lucas's case. The team included Dr. Jennifer Adams, a neuropsychologist specializing in infant brain development, and Dr. Robert Chun, an expert in environmental psychology, who studied how physical locations affect human behavior. The confrontation took place in Millbrook on March 15, 2024, with the investigation team documenting every aspect of Lucas's reactions to various locations throughout the town. Dr. Stevens approached the study with obvious skepticism, designing tests to determine whether Lucas's responses were truly location-specific or could be explained by other factors. The team began by testing Lucas's reactions to various streets and locations throughout Millbrook, including areas with heavy traffic, construction noise, and other potential stressors. The baby remained calm and content during most of the testing, showing no signs of distress even when exposed to loud sounds and unfamiliar environments. But when the team approached Elm Street, Lucas's behavior changed dramatically. Even before they reached the 1200 block, he began showing signs of distress that were documented by the team's sensitive monitoring equipment. His heart rate increased, his breathing became shallow, and he began exhibiting the hypervigilance that had become characteristic of his reactions to the area. The physiological responses are undeniable, Dr. Adams admitted, reviewing the data from her monitoring equipment. This child is experiencing genuine fear and stress in response to this specific location. The investigation reached its most dramatic moment when Dr. Stevens decided to test whether Lucas's reactions were truly connected to the exact spot where Timothy Walsh had died. Using historical records and police reports, the team identified the precise location of the 1962 accident and compared it to the area where Lucas's distress was most intense. The correlation was startling. Lucas's most severe reactions occurred within a 20-foot radius of the exact spot where Timothy Walsh had been struck and killed. The baby's distress would begin to increase as they approached the area and would reach peak intensity when they were directly over the accident site. This level of spatial specificity is remarkable, Dr. Chun observed. If environmental factors were causing the reaction, we would expect to see more diffuse responses to the general area. Instead, the child's distress is precisely correlated with the historical trauma location. The confrontation reached its emotional climax when Dr. Stevens challenged the family's interpretation of Lucas's reactions. "You're attributing supernatural significance to what could be explained by coincidence and unconscious parental suggestion," he argued. "There's no scientific basis for believing that an infant can sense historical trauma." Maria's response was immediate and passionate. "I don't care what you call it," she said, holding Lucas protectively. "I know what I've seen. My son is responding to something real, something that happened to our family. Whether you can explain it or not doesn't change the fact that it's happening." The most compelling moment came when Dr. Stevens attempted to test Lucas's reactions while deliberately providing false information about the location of Timothy's accident. The team told the family they were testing a different area of Elm Street, but secretly conducted their measurements at the actual accident site. Lucas's reactions were identical to his previous responses, occurring at precisely the same location, despite the team's attempts to misdirect his parents. The baby's distress was clearly independent of any conscious knowledge about the accident site. The child's responses are consistent regardless of what information we provide to the family, Dr. Adams concluded. This suggests that his reactions are not influenced by parental suggestion or environmental cues that we can identify. The confrontation concluded with Dr. Stevens's reluctant acknowledgement that the case presented genuine anomalies. While I maintain skepticism about supernatural explanations, I must admit that this child's responses challenge our understanding of infant psychology and environmental sensitivity. He said in his final report, the scientific team's investigation had validated the authenticity of Lucas's reactions while leaving the fundamental mystery unresolved. The Martinez family was left with the knowledge that their son's terror was real and specific, but with no conventional explanation for why. An 8-month-old baby could be responding to a family tragedy that had occurred decades before his birth. Part 6. The AF today. Lucas Martinez is 2 years old, a bright and active toddler who has largely outgrown his intense reactions to Elm Street, but continues to show subtle awareness of the location where his relative died 60 years ago. The family has learned to navigate both their son's unique sensitivity and the profound questions it has raised about memory, trauma, and family connections that transcend time. Maria reports that Lucas's terror of Elm Street began to diminish around his first birthday, evolving into a more manageable awareness of the area. He doesn't scream anymore, she explains, but he still gets quiet and serious when we drive through that part of town. It's like he remembers something important happened there. The family has worked with Dr. Stone to help Lucas develop healthy coping mechanisms for his sensitivity to the location. They've learned to acknowledge his reactions without reinforcing fear, allowing him to process whatever he's experiencing while maintaining his sense of safety and security. Dr. Stone continues to study Lucas's case as part of her research into intergenerational trauma and infant psychology. Her work has contributed to a growing understanding of how family tragedies can affect subsequent generations in unexpected ways. Lucas represents a unique case of location-specific trauma response in infancy. Dr. Stone wrote in her 2024 follow-up study, his reactions have provided insights into the complex ways that unresolved family grief can manifest in subsequent generations. The Martinez family has also taken steps to honor Timothy Walsh's memory, something that the Millbrook community had failed to do for over 60 years. They arranged for a proper headstone to be placed on Timothy's grave and have established a small memorial garden in the children's section of the cemetery. Lucas's connection to be placed on Timothy's grave. Timothy's story has had a profound impact on the extended Martinez family. Carlos has reconnected with distant relatives who had lost touch after the tragedy, and the family has learned more about their genealogical history than they had ever known before. In a strange way, Lucas has brought our family back together, Carlos reflects. Timothy's death tore the family apart, but Lucas's reaction to it has helped us heal wounds that we didn't even know existed. The Millbrook community has also been affected by the revelation of Lucas's case. Eleanor Whitman, who had first shared the story of Timothy's death, has become an advocate for preserving the memory of the tragedy and ensuring that such accidents don't happen again. Maybe it's time we stop trying to forget, Eleanor said during a recent community meeting. Maybe some things need to be remembered, even if they're painful. The scientific community continues to study Lucas's case, with researchers from multiple disciplines attempting to understand the nature of his responses to historical trauma. The Institute for Consciousness Studies has documented his case alongside similar instances of children, displaying impossible awareness of family history. Lucas himself has developed into a normal, happy toddler who shows no signs of being negatively affected by his early experiences. He plays with typical childhood enthusiasm, interacts normally with peers, and displays the curiosity and energy expected of a 2-year-old. The family has learned to live with the mystery of Lucas's early reactions, while focusing on his continued development and well-being. They've created a home environment that honors both his contemporary identity and his apparent connection to family history. We may never understand exactly what happened or why, Maria reflects, but we've learned that some experiences are too powerful to be forgotten, even by time. Lucas helped us remember Timothy, and maybe that's what was supposed to happen. The Martinez family's story has become a bridge between past and present, carrying forward the memory of a 3-year-old boy whose death had been deliberately forgotten by his community. Through Lucas's inexplicable reactions, Timothy Walsh's story has been preserved, and his family's grief has finally found a voice. The mystery of Weiss, Lucas's early terror, remains unsolved. But his journey has provided comfort to other families dealing with similar phenomena and has contributed to a growing understanding of how trauma can echo across generations in unexpected ways. As Lucas continues to grow and develop, his early sensitivity to Elm Street serves as a reminder that the connections between family members may be deeper and more enduring than we typically understand. His story suggests that love, loss, and memory can transcend the boundaries of individual lifetimes, creating bridges between past and present that manifest in the most unexpected ways. Perhaps the most profound aspect of Lucas's story isn't the mystery of how he could sense a family tragedy from 60 years ago, but the possibility that love and loss create bonds so deep that they ripple through generations like stones thrown into still water, and sometimes, just sometimes, the youngest and most innocent among us become the voices that call us back to remember what we thought we had safely forgotten.